Okay, so it's early hours of the morning. I won't speak too loud because people are sleeping next door. But I want to make this now while the issues are still fresh. Yesterday, I believe it was, there was some events across China to commemorate the 120th anniversary of the birth of Chairman Mao. Certainly one of the most significant leaders of the 20th century, a pivotal figure in Chinese history, and a hugely controversial figure. I don't want to go so much into the ins and outs of Mao's many crimes against the Chinese people. I made another video about that. Rather, I want to address the current situation in terms of Mao's legacy. Current President Xi Jinping addressed the nation, and he said that people should not be worshipped like gods, and he said that, but he also gave some praise to Mao for creating the modern China. He noted that Deng Xiaoping considered Mao Zedong thought as one of the tenets of building modern China, which is probably true, but I tried to put some comments about my thoughts on the matter on the China Daily forum. My thoughts weren't in what's the word? They weren't crude. They weren't vitriolic. They were critical, though. They were critical of Mao's legacy, and I've had a look to see if they've got cleared through. Of course, they didn't. They haven't been published. Because China Daily is a communist-run newspaper, communist-controlled newspaper, and they're not going to publish any comments that are critical of Mao. They will publish neutral comments, and I suppose that's a better situation than the absolute sycophantic praise that would have existed in the 1960s. Even the Communist Party go as far as saying he made mistakes, but this was a man whose mistakes caused immense human misery. I bought a book a few days ago called by Yang Jisheng. Might be pronouncing the guy's name wrong, but it's a bestseller called Tombstone, which of course is banned in the People's Republic of China. It's about the author's father who died in the Great Chinese Famine, and the millions more who died in that famine. He cites a figure of 36 million, although the exact figure is disputed, but it's unquestionably a massive famine, arguably the worst in human history. Whether it be 20 million or 30 million or 40 million, no one can dispute that famine was absolutely catastrophic. And if that alone isn't evidence of the sort of misery that Mao caused, because I know there are those who say the famine wasn't his fault, look at the Cultural Revolution and the brainwashed Red Guards, the sort of terrorism and absolute chaos that took place in those years. Even the Communist Party acknowledged it was a dark time. Children denouncing their own parents. It was a very, very ugly time. Forced suicides. Some truly sadistic things took place. I read about the first victim of the Cultural Revolution was a Beijing school teacher whose own students lynched her, poured boiling water over her on the grounds that she wanted to love them like a mother. So she was seen as counter-revolutionary, and there was literally countless cases like this. Those people have never received justice, and the person responsible for that terror is still venerated in China today. Simply saying he made mistakes is a bit of a joke because Mao had absolute power. He had the final say. So saying he made mistakes at the very best is saying he was a bit of an idiot. He had poor judgment. But the way I see it is a nation that's not willing to accept its past cannot move forward. China is a great country. It's made many great achievements in modern times. Its economic advance is to be admired, but whatever way you look at it, it's indisputable that China is a country that doesn't confront its past. It still hasn't shown that it's prepared to confront the dark issues of the past. So it's all very well for vilifying the Japanese for visiting the Yasukuni Shrine, which, yes, I agree that's a controversial thing, and also raising issues about the opium wars and so on, but The simple fact is more Chinese died under Mao than under any foreign invader. That's simply a fact, whatever way you look at it. And the perverse reality is this is a man who's still venerated. So whilst the party may say that he's not God and that he made mistakes, they still promote this personality cult. And I've seen that personally. I've seen Chinese school children's textbooks that say the Chinese people love Mao and encourage the children to do likewise. So this personality cult is still promoted. And until that ends, then nothing's going to change. Now, I don't expect the party to come out and say he was a mass murdering dictator, which he was, but at the very least they should discourage this personality cult. If she is really serious about not having sycophantic worship, then at the very least they should discourage a personality cult. But they do the exact opposite. They promote a personality cult. It's just one of the cruelest ironies of modern history that one of the 20th century's most destructive leaders is a man who's still venerated. And this is almost unique. You don't see this. I think the only other example I can think of is in North Korea, where the Kims are still venerated. But in most other countries that have suffered from dictatorship, many of the people in those countries today recognize the dictators for what they were. Russia with Stalin is maybe questionable. Okay, that's Stalin to some extent is still venerated, but not as much as Mao. Germany's done the right thing with Hitler, vilified him for bringing that country to ruin. China one day hopefully will realise that whatever achievements Mao may have made, and I acknowledge he had achievements, it will never ever justify the misery he caused in the largest famine in human history, in the absolute chaos of the 1960s, in absolutely far from stabilising China, he turned China to chaos. And whatever achievements a man made doesn't really, one thing people often cite is, oh, China's population grew in that time. Well, so what? Does that really vindicate his crimes? Does that vindicate the millions that he killed? The millions who've never got justice? I think not. But the simple fact is, my example of the China Daily just shows that you cannot criticise Mao in China and get it published in a communist-controlled newspaper publication. There may be a critique of Mao on cyberspace, I hope there is, but I will say one thing: I think young Chinese are a lot less brainwashed and loving them than their parents, and that's a good thing. But China as a country still has a long way to go in terms of addressing this man's tyranny. The Chinese today aren't brainwashed. They know what a dictatorship is. I mean, they look at North Korea and they look at that the same way the West would look at the Mao era in China. And they see North Korea, and there's a huge contrast between China and North Korea. There's no comparison. In fact, I've been to China, and I guarantee you, the Chinese people are not brainwashed in that sort of way. However, this personality cult around Mao Zedong is still promoted, and in rural areas, there's definitely a personality cult around him. There's no question about that. I mean, I'm against any sort of personality cult, but especially over a man whose policies were so devastating and caused so much misery. It's just such a bizarre thing. And I think one reason is China is still an incredibly jingoistic society. Therefore, it's easier to dwell on issues and past wrongs like the Opium Wars, even though in terms of lives lost, they were minuscule compared to what Mao done. That's easier because the Communist Party then can unite people with them. It's pretty easy to stir the Chinese up into nationalistic fervour. It's a rising superpower, and I guess that comes with the territory. But what I'd like to say in this video is that sadly this personality cult still exists, and until critical works on Mao are permitted in China, then I will not believe that there is objectivity when it comes to Mao Zedong. Until Mao the Unknown Story and Tombstone and other such books are published in that country, there will be no objectivity on the subject, and it will be entirely biased. They may allow neutral material which acknowledges some of his faults, but only if it's coupled with lavish praise for his achievements. I mean, part of the thing they were featuring in China Daily was, I think they called it precious photos of the great helmsman or something along those lines. So it's clear that there's still a sort of idolization of the man. It's unquestionable. I mean, I would argue Deng Xiaoping done a lot more for modern China than Mao did. Some may say Deng took ideas from Mao, but it was Deng that took the steps to open China up, whereas Mao isolated China. And what the point I would make is, a nation confident in itself wouldn't feel the need to censor this stuff. You know, if you really passionately believe that Mao was right, then stop being such a coward. Don't defend the censorship around debating his legacy. You know, and this is the problem with China. It's not an objective nation at all when it comes to, you know, you'll often hear Chinese people complain about how biased the Western media is, but I guarantee you, for the most part, I mean, when Margaret Thatcher died this year, the British media was pretty neutral on her legacy. They certainly didn't sycophantically praise her, whereas in China, there's no objectivity on Mao whatsoever. And that's a fundamental difference. So I just think it's very unfortunate. I'm not saying that his achievements should be ignored. What I'm saying is his crimes should not be ignored, as they currently are. And this isn't bad judgment. This was callous, focused policies. He knew what he was doing. This is obvious by his own rhetoric. I just think one day, hopefully, China is going to wake up and see what the rest of the world sees about this man, that he was a mass murdering dictator. Possibly the most destructive leader of the 20th century in terms of killing his own people. Hitler was a tyrant who caused a world war and deserves eternal infamy, but in terms of killing their own people, I don't think anyone surpasses Mao Zedong. Pol Pot, proportionally speaking, possibly killed more. Proportionally speaking, I'm talking in terms of the population of Cambodia in the 70s, another communist dictator I might add. But it's indisputable that Mao killed millions, and I find it's hard as an outsider not to feel uneasy at how someone who could cause such misery can be venerated. It's very hard to program that and accept that.